please define the transaction zone? How does the moment of purchase coincide with the idea to remind, reward, and recharge?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey for ITR
Mhm.
with the transaction zone and kind of, when it culminates in opening the transaction zone like we did in Dublin last week. You see something on the shop floor, but you've been thinking about for so long. It's like this dream you had, and it looks like it really was in your head, and it's just there, and it's like, wow, okay. So it was amazing, but the journey started long time before that. I think, we in Mars for many years in domestic markets, obviously being global leaders in gum, etc. We've always been the captains of the transaction zone. And
Okay.
actually, some of the people in my team and now in ITR, have been leading this, for example, across the whole of the Middle East, where if you go and see what we are doing in some of the domestic stores there, it's amazing on really converting that moment and driving impulse. I think when we refreshed our strategy in November 2022, we had a look at sort of where are the white spaces in the opportunity, either that are, to convert consumers, either where they are not being converted, or the sort of strategy to convert them is inconsistent or suboptimal. And the transaction zone, which is, say, a big global lever for us, was very clearly came to the top of that white spot list. So
Mhm.
we started from then to think around, okay, how do we then turn this into an opportunity? But what we know from domestic markets is that, at that moment of purchase, so, a consumer, a shopper has gone through their shopping journey. They may have made their decision, but they're not quite finished until they've checked out. And it is one additional moment at which you see the stress level of a consumer actually increases quite heavily at that moment.
Okay.
So in a way, they're looking for a moment of reward. They're like, okay, I'm nearly done. I deserve a treat. Or actually, they're feeling a bit exhausted and they need a bit of a recharge. Where a Snickers bar might come in, also for reward or recharge, could be the same consumption moment, but for a different purpose. Or, for example, a refueling or reminding. And I think that's particularly relevant in airports, where actually, you may have gone through the shop, and actually as you're checking out, you think, okay, actually I need a cable for my smartphone, or something like this, or, oh, I forgot to buy a gift. Okay, there's one at that impulse moment. So we know that those impulse moments existed, and we knew that recharge, reward, remind strategy really plays out. And it was just about bringing that together with a strategic intent and then a vision on what we could execute to actually enable that, which is very important cross category, not just on confectionery, and enable that conversion moment cross category. Our sort of demand purpose in Mars is to have the right offer at the right price and at every relevant touch point for every consumer that would want it. So, we always want to take every opportunity to convert a consumer, and that's really the white space conversion opportunity that we had. And then, as I say, the culmination of that was the first time we do this with such an intention in Dublin last week.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like it would be almost the opposite when you get to the purchase area. You'd feel a bit more relieved. Your shopping journey's
Yeah,
almost at the end. So actually, I would think the difference, but very interesting.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's a domestic learning that we saw, and that's actually being accelerated by self-checkout as well now. And I don't know if
Right.
anyone has ever tried to navigate a self-checkout whilst having kids in the supermarket with them at the same time, probably knows what I'm talking about. So
Mhm.
our transaction zone strategy does actually take everything from a queue system to a manned pay, which is where you have actually a transaction zone sort of module, a showcasing module just by the checkout, or actually for self checkout as well. So, we are working with all of those spaces. I think that stress moment is a new insight we saw really does happen with the self checkouts, where people have to navigate that. So yeah, and it just does give another point of conversion, and one of the things I think sometimes we forget when we have such amazingly well-known, beautiful brands as we have in Mars is, every time we convert one extra consumer that was not thinking about purchasing our product, that's a victory. So we need to take every single one of those small moments.
Right, of course. Mhm. Purchases made within the transaction zone are often impulse driven for
Yeah.
self-consumption, which we kind of covered. Tell me about the process of designing the zone and how the final outcome caters to these shopping behaviors.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we know is, and this is why, and I think in all the conversations we haven't had in the last few years, I'm a massive sponsor of the confectionery category and the role that it can play in the channel. It doesn't always get the airtime I believe that it deserves. That does differ a bit by region, but the reality of the confectionery category is that, the margin is good. It's relatively low maintenance because you don't need many brand ambassadors compared to other categories to manage it, and it is impulse. So most of the time it comes on top, and we knew that. And again, that's why transaction zone and that impulse moment particularly works within the sort of confectionery and the snacking space overall. Um, the beautiful thing of working with retailers on a transaction zone like we've done with Arianta recently is, it's a commitment of Mars that we're not going to force fit what we want to do. This has to always be done in full collaboration with the retailer,
Mhm.
who know their shopper best at that moment on what they might need. So, what we do is share, our vision, our strategy in mind on the opportunity and how we could convert it. And I think we have a very compelling story there. But actually, it's always to work sort of hand in hand with the retailer, with the partner whose actual real estate we're going to be using, to work with them, say, who know their consumer best on what do the consumers actually need? What do they believe they need when they're in the checkout zone? Because we know confectionery, but the total consumer needs, the retailer probably knows better. So we firstly align on what we call the power categories of a transaction zone. So which categories do we align on really need to be reflected, within the
Mhm.
transaction zone strategy? And we align on that first, and then we will model sort of the transaction zone implementation around both of those needs. And to give
Okay.
you an example of that, it was quite interesting when we were working with Arianta, and we had an amazing partnership with them around the whole process. We'd build a proposal. We hadn't thought about actually bags, shopping bags, where the
Okay.
consumers need to buy bags to put their,
Right.
potentially quite heavy bottles of alcohol in that they may have just bought. So like, oh gosh, okay, we thought we'd nearly finished the race, then we had to go back and start again to integrate those needs, and it's an amazing
Right.
learning process for us to go through, because what we don't want to do is force fit a domestic transaction zone into an airport environment. But in order to not do that, we need to then work with a retailer on what categories really need to be reflected and how, and then just work together on what it might look like and what flow we believe is best.